Welcome to Treasures at Independence, where we here at Independence National Historical Park get to share some of our lesser known treasures with you. I'm Jeff Siebert, the National Park Service Ranger.
I'm Carrie Dethorn, I'm the Museum Curator here at Independence.
The treasure we're sharing with you today is a transit instrument made by John Bird in London in 1760. It was one of several tools used by Charles Mason, an astronomer, and Jeremiah Dixon, a surveyor, to accurately determine the borders between the colonies of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware.
Isn't that border also called the Mason-Dixon line?
That's correct. The border between Pennsylvania and Maryland is often referred to as the Mason-Dixon line, sort of shorthand for these two individuals' names. Now, while you may not interact with borders as large as those surveyed by these two men on a regular basis, you interact with borders every day of your life, whether it's the home you live in, the streets around you, or your personal space bubble. These borders define the area around you. Now, this was just one of several tools used to mark the borders during the colonization of what would become the United States. This is part of the colonization process in which Europeans will mark out boundaries and lay claims to lands that were inhabited or had been inhabited by Native Americans. Europeans overall are going to benefit from this. In the long run, Native peoples are going to suffer.
So boundaries were a problem in the colonial era?
Well, yes, it was, because in the 1600s, Lord Calvert gets a charter from the British Crown for the lands that would become Maryland. And then later that century, William Penn will get a charter of land from the Crown for the lands that become Pennsylvania and Delaware. However, the charters didn't specify or didn't clearly mark where those borders were at, so it will lead to disputes.
And why would there be disputes about a boundary? Didn't everybody know where they lived?
Well, not necessarily. So when they're unclear, then you have to determine, well, who do I pay taxes to? Do I pay them to Maryland? Do I pay them to Pennsylvania? And so just like disputes today over borders and boundaries, it can lead to violence or lawsuits. In this case, it led to both.
In 1732, this dispute heads to a court in Great Britain. It will not be until 1750 that the court hands down a ruling that settles the border dispute. As we look at a modern map of the three states, we can see evidence of the ruling. First, let's take a look at the borders separating Pennsylvania and Maryland. It looks like a straight line running east to west. The court ruled the border separating the colonies would be a parallel line of latitude that lies 15 miles south of the city of Philadelphia. Next, let's look at the border separating Maryland and Delaware. As we see on the map, there is a peninsula that both states share. The southern border of Delaware is a straight line running east to west halfway through that peninsula. This line stops in the middle of the peninsula and would be known as the midpoint. That also seems fairly straightforward. Next, things get difficult. Let's look at the northern border of Delaware. It looks as if it is semicircular. That's because the court ruled that a 12-mile radius be drawn around the town of Newcastle, Delaware. This line was to be drawn in a counterclockwise motion, starting on the western bank of the Delaware River. Finally, the western border of Delaware would consist of a line from the midpoint touching the radius around Newcastle. However, this was not a straight line, but a tangent line, which meant it intersected the radius at a 90-degree angle. The court ruling required a survey.
It took a while. There were several unsuccessful attempts before Mason and Dixon are hired in 1763. They and a crew of over 100 hired workers would spend 4 years marking and determining this border. So they basically cut a path over streams, rivers, mountains, and through forests to accurately mark those borders.
Mason and Dixon actually used this instrument.
They would use this instrument at night to observe specific stars. They would use it as a point of reference in their calculation of determining where they are at to make sure that they're actually marking that border and they're on the right path. Some of the problems, though, is you can't do observations in one night. It also has to be clear. In addition, they're stopping every 10 to 11 miles because of the curvature of the Earth. With the technology that Mason and Dixon had, they did an amazingly accurate job of marking the borders between these colonies. But modern technology has allowed for an even more precise marking of the borders. But this transit instrument, the borders, and those boundary markers are a connection to the past and those events. While the history of all these things are important, how we preserve it and take care of it is also equally important. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Carrie?
Really interesting object, not only because of how it's made, but because of how it's used. Now, as I'm talking, I'm going to be sort of gesturing near it. So I'm going to put on my protective gloves, so just in case I accidentally touch it, I don't leave any of my sweat on the surface of the metal. Because if you look closely at the eyepiece, you'll see where somebody in the recent past touched it with ungloved hands, and their fingerprints etched right into the brass of which the telescope is made. Today, what we do to care for it is all of the metal components, which are brass, have a very thin coating of wax on them. You can't see it, but it's there to protect them from pollutants and from fingerprints. This is very, very heavy, so it stays here on exhibit on the second floor of Independence Hall and doesn't move. And that is really the best way to preserve anything, is just leave it alone and don't touch it. Because this is such a rare survival from our historic past. In 1869, this instrument was used for the observation of the transit of Venus, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the passage of the planet Venus over the surface of the sun. Transit is used to measure the distance from the Earth to Venus and from Venus to the sun. A very important calculation. So important, actually, that it really brought the colonial Americans, onto the world stage of science in the latter part of the 18th century. And here's what I mean by that. The calculation was a big deal. Everybody's pretty excited about it. And the Royal Society of London, for example, sent astronomers all over the known world, even to what they called the South Seas, or the Pacific, the way we call it today, to take these measurements from various points. There was some in Greenland, and then, of course, in the British colonies in North America. And as you mentioned, you've got to have clear sky, whether it's at night or day, for using the transit. And it was a cloudy day in Europe and Britain on the day of the transit, and so no accurate measurements could be taken in either Britain or Europe. And the only accurate information that was collected in 1769 was that collected by the Philadelphians here in North America.
It's pretty amazing. It
is amazing, and it really brought those scientists here in America up to the notice of the rest of the Western world. And the idea that they were competent, the colonials were competent enough to gather this information, really essential, which wouldn't occur again in anybody who was then living his lifetime. And it was really kind of a sublime moment for the colonials, because they'd always been second-class citizens. Oh, those colonials don't know what they're talking about. Well, this proved that they did. And that makes this object this wonderful bridge between the real world of the 18th century and the intellectual world of the Enlightenment. And that's why we preserve objects, so that we can use them as touchstones to bounce through the doorway to the past, and from that doorway come back to our own world and understand a little bit more about our own world.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for sharing this with us, and thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll catch some more of our videos and see some of our other treasures here at Independence. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.